You probably had sugar this morning, maybe in your coffee, maybe in your cereal. It's automatic, simple, unremarkable. Just another day, just another spoonful. But that white powder in your kitchen, it has a body count in the millions. Behind every crystal of sugar lies a history of slavery, torture, and death on an industrial scale. The sugar in your coffee connects you directly to the greatest crime in human history. And most people have no idea. This is the dark truth about sugar. For most of human existence, sugar was rare. It grew wild in Southeast Asia, and people simply chewed the raw stalks. Then around the 1st century AD, someone in India figured out how to crystallize it, to turn liquid sweetness into solid form. This discovery would reshape the world. Arab merchants carried sugar west along trade routes. By the time of ancient Rome, Europeans knew about this mysterious honey from reeds, but they treated it like medicine. Rare, expensive, almost magical. Then Rome fell, and Europe forgot about sugar for centuries. Until the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II sent European knights to conquer Jerusalem. They went for God, but what they found was sugar, in the Levant. Arabs had been cultivating sugar for generations, and the Crusaders tasted it for the first time. To Europeans who'd never known anything sweeter than honey, this was revolutionary. Medieval writers called sugar precious beyond measure, necessary for the health of mankind. They believed it was medicinal, almost sacred, and they wanted more. Much more. The Venetians saw an opportunity. They established sugar refineries in the Middle East and began shipping sugar back to Europe. For the first time, European elites could buy this sweet salt, and they paid incredible prices. But here's where the darkness begins. Sugar cane is brutal to harvest. The stalks grow 4 inches thick. You have to cut them by hand under a scorching sun, crush them in massive rollers, then boil the juice for hours or even days. Nobody wanted to do this voluntarily, so they used slaves. At first, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Greeks, Bulgarians, people from the Black Sea. But this was just the beginning. Everything changed in 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed west and discovered the Caribbean. Columbus brought sugarcane to the islands on his second voyage in 1493. The climate was perfect. Hot, humid, volcanic soil. Sugar grew like wildfire. The Spanish established plantations on Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti. They tried enslaving the indigenous Taino people, but within a generation, disease and brutal conditions had killed most of them. So in 1518, Spain officially authorized something new: the direct transport of enslaved Africans to the Americas. This marked the beginning of industrial-scale, racially based, hereditary slavery. And sugar was its engine. They called it the Triangle Trade. European ships loaded with manufactured goods sailed to West Africa, where they traded for human beings. These people were chained together and packed into ships' holds so tightly they couldn't sit up. This middle passage took 6 to 8 weeks. 1 in 5 didn't survive. Those who did were sold in Caribbean slave markets like livestock. And here's the horrifying truth. Plantation owners didn't expect their slaves to survive long term. The average life expectancy for a slave on a sugar plantation was 7 years. 7 years. Think about that. When someone bought a slave, they knew that person would probably be dead within 7 years from exhaustion, disease, or injury. And they didn't care, because it was cheaper to work someone to death and buy a replacement than to provide humane conditions. Why was sugar so deadly? Imagine working from before sunrise to after sunset in tropical heat, cutting thick sugarcane with a machete, back-breaking labor that shreds your hands and tears your muscles. The fields are full of snakes and disease-carrying insects. One small cut becomes a fatal infection. Then you haul the cane to mills where massive rollers crush it. If you're not careful, and when you're exhausted after 16 hours, mistakes happen. The rollers catch your hand and pull your entire arm in, crushing bone and tearing flesh. Many slaves lost limbs or lives this way. After milling, you stand over huge cauldrons of boiling sugar syrup in buildings reaching 120 degrees. The steam scalds your lungs. One slip and you fall into boiling sugar, a death too horrible to describe. For this, you receive minimal food, terrible housing, no medical care, and constant beatings. This wasn't accidental cruelty. It was economic calculation. Sugar was so profitable that killing workers through overwork made business sense. How many people died? Historians estimate 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic during the slave trade era. Millions more died in Africa during capture. Millions more during the Middle Passage. It's one of the greatest crimes in human history, and sugar was its primary fuel. In the 18th century, 80% of all wealth flowing from European colonies came from sugar. 80%. The sugar islands became obscenely valuable, more valuable than entire continents. When Britain defeated France in 1763, France seriously considered keeping the tiny island of Guadeloupe instead of all of Canada, because sugar made small islands worth more than vast territories. Round and round the triangle trade went for centuries. Ships, goods, human beings, sugar, profit. Money flowing one direction, misery flowing every direction. This system built the economic foundation of the modern world. The accumulated wealth of nations like Britain and America, the wealth that financed the Industrial Revolution and created modern capitalism. It came from sugar and the slave labor that produced it. The system finally began to crack in the 19th century. Technology helped. Europeans figured out how to extract sugar from beets grown in their own fields, reducing dependence on Caribbean plantations. Moral pressure from abolitionists played a role too. Britain abolished slavery in 1833, France in 1848. But in some places, slavery persisted for decades longer. Cuba and Brazil held on to the institution until the 1880s, long after most of the civilized world had moved on. Even after formal abolition, the exploitation continued under different names: debt bondage, indentured servitude, migrant labor. The system changed its appearance, but the underlying extraction remained. Today, Haiti, the first nation founded by freed slaves after a successful revolution in 1804, is the poorest country in the Americas. Cuba spent much of the 20th century as a sugar-dependent satellite state, first of America, then of the Soviet Union. Many African nations still struggle with underdevelopment because for centuries, their most valuable resource, their people, was forcibly extracted to work sugar plantations. The resource curse, they call it, when a place becomes too dependent on one easily extracted resource. That resource devours all other industries like a cancer. It happened with sugar. It happens with oil. It happens whenever easy money makes long-term development seem unnecessary. So what's the lesson? Nothing is ever as simple as it seems. That sugar in your coffee isn't just a sweetener. It's a lens through which you can understand how power works, how economic systems shape human behavior, how the things we take for granted often have the darkest histories. I'm not telling you to feel guilty about using sugar. The millions who died on those plantations didn't die so we could feel guilty centuries later. They died because human beings are capable of monstrous cruelty when profit is at stake. But I am telling you to remember, to understand, to see the world clearly, because the exploitation hasn't stopped. It's just changed forms. The plantation owners found new ways to extract value from human beings. The industries that profit from our sugar consumption today use lobbying, advertising, and food science to exploit our biological vulnerabilities instead of using whips. The systems evolve, but the pattern remains. Those with power finding ways to extract wealth from those without it, packaging exploitation as something normal and acceptable. When you reach for that sugar bowl tomorrow morning, pause for just a moment. Remember the journey those crystals made, not just from factory to store to kitchen, but through centuries of human suffering. Remember that history isn't something distant and dead. It's alive in every ordinary moment. Because ultimately, understanding history doesn't just tell us what happened. It teaches us to see what's happening now with clearer eyes. And that might be the most important thing of all.